Welcome everyone. Good to see you guys this morning. If you did join us yesterday, I'm Sean. I'm the founding member at the Association of Gleaning Organizations. If you did join us yesterday, you've probably seen my face a lot as I've been in and out of these different sessions. I'm going to do a brief overview for those who may not have joined us, who may not understand a few of the features of the program. So if you're on the right-hand side of the screen, the top little icon is the chat. You can throw some comments in the chat if you have just general comments about what's being said and want to have conversations with the other audience members. For those who can multitask, they can do so over in the chat there. It's really helpful for me if you ask questions on the little icon below that. Looks like a chalkboard and a person. If you type your questions in there, Stephanie's going to help me monitor those today, and she'll pass them along to me. And you can also upvote and downvote, or you can upvote those questions by clicking on the heart if it's something that you also are interested in knowing about. So just click on there. We're not going to do any polls today in my session, but others might. That's the next icon down. So if someone refers you to a poll, just click on the answer that fits you best in that one. And you can see everyone who's in the session by clicking on the people below. If you jump over to the icons on the left, the person ones down there, it says networking. If you hover over it, that's everyone who's at the event, and you can click on their name and invite them to video chat with you, or just send them a quick message. Hopefully you're using that feature and connecting with other people who you haven't seen in a long time, as we've all been sequestered in our homes. Above that is a little group room. You can join in and have some group conversations if you want. It's a little world icon. There's some great videos in the coffee cup icon, a bunch of different programs that EPA has been supporting over the last year, and you'll hear more about them in their session next. And then at the very top is the activities, where you can jump between sessions and find what you want to listen to next. So there's my little brief spiel about the program. Hopefully it's working well for all of you, and that you can all see and all that stuff's working. So I'm going to jump in and share a little bit about the Association of Gleaners, the work that we've been doing, and sort of how we got here for those of you who maybe are newer to this conversation. So this is the gleaning landscape. This is where all of the gleaners are in North America that we know about. There's about 185 organizations that we are familiar with, and I'm sure there's dozens out there that we're not familiar with. And I thought we'd get a little history on how the association got to where it's at and what we've been doing as your association over the last year. And if you have questions as I go through my presentation, just type them in that question tab, and I'll take a few pauses and answer some of them. So I hope that you do have questions. So this is a photo of our first symposium. So a little over 5 years ago, we, I guess myself and a few members of my staff, decided that we would host the first International Gleaning Symposium. And as you can see, a lofty title for a very small event, but it was a great event of about 20 of us, some of which are here today. I think I was trying to count, and I think there's at least 3 of us who have been, or 4 of us who have been to every symposium. Myself, Catherine from Concrete Jungle, Dave from Uproot, and if Barbara's here, I think she's the 4th who's been to all of them. Hopefully I didn't miss someone, but so that humble group decided that we wanted to meet again and we should try this again. So we've ended up hosting annual symposiums. This is our 4th. We didn't host one last year due to COVID, but every year we move these symposiums around the country, trying to make them accessible to the small organizations that exist all over the place. And at that second symposium, which was in Atlanta, we had a little conversation with the attendees there, and many of us wanted to find other ways to connect, um, and to look at what a more formal association would look like. So we began having this sort of conversation, which I took the responsibility of spearheading. And so in 2018, I spoke with 50 organizations all around the country about forming an association, you know, and what that would look like. We began to speak to Canadian organizations to see if they wanted to join in the association. And then we had 7 different conference calls about what the association would look like. And about 30 plus organizations were involved in those conference calls as well. And what we decided is we would host a 2019 Gleaning Network Summit. And so prior to our 2019 symposium, we all met in a room. And what we realized is that Gleaning organizations are really, really diverse. This is a little word cloud that I made for that meeting of everyone's mission statements. And while we can see some commonalities, we also realized we were all doing things in a really unique way, but we all had really similar needs. You know, we wanted some help with funding resources. We wanted to better understand best practices. We wanted, you know, better ways to educate and be part of the food waste conversation. And so we unanimously, well, here's a little quote from one of the members. You know, mostly we'd like the network to be a hub where Gleaning organizations can easily get in touch with each other to ask questions and share advice, best practices, experiences else. And that's what we came out of that 2019 meeting realizing, is that although we were very unique and different organizations, we had these common goals, and we all wanted a more formal way to connect in a formal organization to take on the work of connecting us. We realized that connecting 180 plus organizations wasn't going to happen if each of us did it as sort of on the side of the other work that we were doing. And there was some disagreement on whether we'd be an association or a network, but in the end, we decided we would form an association. And we adapted a rough mission statement, and then a group of us wordsmithed that over the next few months. And this is the mission statement that we sent back out to members and that members approved. And that is that the Association of Gleaning Organization builds the capacity of organizations recovering fresh fruits and vegetables from farms, gardens, and backyards across North America. And by engaging communities to harvest surplus produce, vulnerable populations are provided with increased access to wholesome foods. Our network of Gleaning organizations is adaptable, sustainable, and connected. And we also adopted 5 goals that we would work on over the short term. We would create a hub that would to support and connect Gleaning organizations. We'd create a shared data-informed story that tells the impact of Gleaning. We'd educate the public and funding resources about Gleaning and its potential impact. We would provide opportunities to network and communicate among members. And we would create a platform to share financial and programmatic resources. And so, empowered with these goals from you guys as Gleaners and this mission of what we as a Gleaning Association wanted to accomplish, I set out to sort of make that happen. And the first thing I realized is that we needed to raise funding. And we did happen to secure some funding. And so in the end of 2019, we received a grant from the Clinil Foundation for 2 years to launch this association. It was $100,000 over those 2 years to see what we could build. And at the same time, we set out to form a board, and we did so we formed a advisory committee to do the board selection process and put a call out to our members to join that board. The advisory committee included myself representing an urban Gleaning organization. We had Keith from Cross Ministries representing not only a on-farm Gleaning organization, but one of the larger Gleaning organizations in the US. And then we had Donna from Haywood Gleaners, representing an all-volunteer-led organization. And we interviewed the candidates who were interested in serving on the board and selected 4 founding board members. That included Ava from Hope's Harvest, Teresa from Salvation Farms, Catherine from Concrete Jungle, and Stephanie from Glen, Kentucky. And we realized in their initial meeting we needed some formal organizational structure. So we decided to form a 501c3. That kind of got a little bit sidelined as we responded to COVID and the needs of our members during COVID. But we are waiting on an answer to one final question, and that paperwork should be filed very shortly. And we anticipate being our independent organization by the end of this year. We also wanted a better way to track memberships, who was involved and who wasn't. So we launched a membership program in January or February this year. I'm blanking on the exact time. I guess it was January or December, actually. So we rolled it out right at the end of the year and at the first of this year. And we have 52 members right now who have formally committed to supporting our work and made a financial contribution to the work we're doing. We tried to structure that membership in a way that it supported, that was feasible for both the small and the large members. We have launched a whole host of programs I want to talk about. And probably the work that I feel is the most important that we've been doing is we've been network weaving. For those of you who don't understand what I mean by network weaving, I think this is a great visual of what the gleaning landscape looked like when we started first hosting our symposium. There was a few of us who knew about other gleaners, especially if we were in an area like like California or Washington or the Northeast that had a larger concentration of gleaners. But for the majority of us, we were very isolated. We didn't know many other gleaners or what was happening in the gleaning world, and we definitely weren't acting with one voice. And as we begin to think about building this network, we have a couple of choices, and one was to build kind of a hub and spoke model, and the other was to build a node model. And this is a visualization of what the hub and spoke model would look like. And we could easily envision ourselves as the center, and this is an easy model to build, or an easier model to build. No network building is easy, I don't think. But Ago would be in the center, and we would connect to each and every one of you, or the majority of you, in a personal way, and you would have a connection to us, and maybe to me as a founding member. But this type of network is really fragile. If Ago fails to secure long-term funding, or if those connections are more bound to me than the organization, this could very easily fall apart. And it's also really cumbersome. Everything doesn't need to come to me and then go back out to you guys. So this may be sort of what our organization is starting to look like now, but our real goal is something more like this, which is a node model where many of you serve as connectors to many gleaners around the continent. And if one of us falls out or the turnover happens in our jobs, this network doesn't fall apart because you can remove so many pieces of it at a time. And our goal is to build this kind of network. But that requires the participation of each and every one of you. It requires you to share your expertise, to make connections, to jump on video calls with people who you don't know very well during the symposium, or during a coffee chat or something else, and connect, to tell us about people you hear about who are gleaning in your neighborhood who may not be on our list. So we can not just connect them to you, but connect them to gleaners around the continent who are doing important work in the gleaning space. So, we launched a whole host of programs in the last 12 months, the first of which is our coffee chats. We launched this in April of 2020. This was in response to COVID. Many of you were struggling to understand where gleaning fit in the pandemic landscape. You knew that people in your communities were struggling with loss of jobs and hunger, and we're watching these long lines at food banks, but we're wondering how to keep your volunteers and staff safe. And so we started hosting a couple calls where we could share ideas, and we found these calls to be really helpful. People were learning and sharing and connecting. You know, you can see back to these goals. My goal has always been to do whatever the goals that you guys have empowered me with. And so, you know, these were providing opportunities to network and communicate among members. It was building your capacity. And it was part of a hub that was supporting and connecting. But we knew we didn't want these calls all to be about COVID. So we set out to sort of think about things that we would have provided for you in our in-person symposium as we canceled that. And we started hosting these monthly calls. These are open to anyone. You don't have to be a member of AGO to join the coffee chats. We just want this to be a resource to everyone. We record them, we send them out in our newsletter. So anyone can have access to them. If you miss one and you wanted to go back and review a topic, you can email me and get those. And these aren't me presenting. These are you guys presenting. And this is built on one of the real core beliefs I believe about this association is, and that it's just a fact. You know, many of you have been doing nonprofit work far longer than I've been doing nonprofit work. And a lot of you have been doing gleaning work far longer. And frankly, you guys are the experts. And the longer I'm leading the association and not running my own gleaning organization, the less and less of an expert I become on gleaning. And maybe I know more about you guys and more about network building, but I forget things about what it's like to be on the ground gleaning. And so all of our program is designed to view the, you know, around our largest resource, which is our network base, and you guys as the experts out there. And so typically a couple of you will come on and share some ideas or your thoughts around what's working in your programming, or maybe ask questions about what's not working. And then we have a conversation. We usually have 25 to 30 participants on these. Occasionally we do bring an outside expert to help all of us as gleaners, whether that's around fundraising or law or, you know, some of those tricky topics, but we really do try to rely on the membership base because there's so much expertise within the gleaning world. And that brings me to our mentorship program. This is where we've asked more experienced gleaners to help people new to the field. We ran a pilot of this early this year. We ended up offering 8 mentorships with 7 different mentors. And 6 people ended up completing that program and based, you know, all across the country from the East Coast to Hawaii. We actually provided some seed funding to Kalua Harvest in Hawaii to launch an incubator program, or to launch a pilot of a value-added program where they're going to make some unique products, and we're continuing to work with them to help them sort of develop that program, in additionally to providing them with some small financial resources. And not only did the mentees have the chance to meet weekly with their mentors and get guidance about whatever they were talking about, we also met weekly as a cohort where we could share ideas and learn new skills and learn or propose different ways to look at our problem. So each part of that cohort is directed around a certain topic, and then it is largely a conversation where, again, we're sharing from our learned experiences. We're going to do another round of this in the fall, so we'll both be looking for mentors and for mentees. Look for those calls as we start to move into fall. And please, if you have some expertise, raise your hand. Build this movement. And if you need help, raise your hand. Let us help you and guide you and build this movement. We also launched some affinity groups. We have 5 different groups in different focus areas, from, you know, all volunteer organizations to organizations with, you know, a few staff and are mid-size, maybe have budget around $100,000. Organizations that are doing work besides gleaning, and gleaning is just one of the many programs they are running. And then we have a group for people who are just primarily focused on figuring out how to glean from farms. And then our mentees have formed a group that is for mentees. We hope to see that continue and different cohorts of mentees jump into there. And we meet regularly to talk shop. Some groups meet every other week, some groups meet every other month. And usually these are really small, focused areas where, you know, the organizations are very much like your organization. They're dealing with similar problems. There's usually 3 to 7 people in these calls. With our schedules, you know, some of us are jumping into all of them. Some of us are jumping into a few of them. We've also done some one-off calls around affinity group stuff. We just hosted a call for people gleaning and trying to help deal or reduce bear interactions. We've also, yeah, you know, and again, like all of our other programs, it meets those goals that you've set out and focuses on our mission. We're really excited to be launching a technical assistance program. This is going to launch in July. This is a partnership with EPA. There's some really great champions of gleaning over at EPA that you'll hopefully hear in a later session today. And this will provide technical assistance in key areas for gleaners in what's called EPA Region 4. This is the southeastern United States. We hope that this becomes a model where we can use this to launch some other technical assistance. There's a lot of ways for you as our network to get involved. If you're a gleaner who has a technical expertise in one of the areas that we'll be sending out shortly, raise your hand, offer that expertise, offer to teach some new gleaners we'll be compensating you for your time. It's another thing that's really important to us is finding ways to build your capacity in your organizations by providing you with additional resources. And if we have capacity, some of these trainings may be available to gleaners in the wider gleaning community, or a recording of them may be available. So we'll be making those available to try to build your capacity. And this is part of a long effort. Is we're trying to do another one of the goals, which is educate funding resources about gleaning. And there's very little government funding that's going towards gleaning right now. And EPA has become very interested in gleaning as it meets many of their objectives. And so we're continuing to work with the champions within that program to build other resources for gleaners out there. We've also been working to help revise the National Gleaning Project website. Our advisory team that was formed from gleaners around the country is working to make this website more useful. Those advisors are being compensated for their time by Vermont Law School to help build this new resource. And our goal is to take this website and make it more helpful to gleaners by not only revising the legal resources that are on there and the map that's on there to make it easier for volunteers to find and funders to find your organization. We're also gathering resources that are outside of legal to list on those. So you've probably gotten an email asking for, you know, do you have a volunteer manual? Do you have volunteer waivers? Do you have staff manuals? Do you have promotional materials that you're willing to share? All of those are going to go on this website. And this highlights how I see, and I mean, many of these programs highlight how I see the association moving forward. And that's us finding ways to work with you already. You know, we had a conversation about software yesterday. Do you have a software program you think would help build the gleaning movement? We want to work with you. We don't want to build our own. We don't need to build another legal resource for gleaners. We want to take what's out there and build it. Because our goal is not to build the association of gleaning organizations, it's to build the gleaning movement by building you as individual organizations. We've also been helping to promote press. You know, we did 4 national radio interviews last year, plus on the podcast. We were in 3 national newspapers, including the New York Times. And with all of these, we connected these reporters with other organizations. Again, our goal is not to build us, it's to build the movement. And so we connected them with those of you who could help share this gleaning story much better than we could. And we're happy to be a resource to help connect them to you guys. And so we have a long ways to go on some of these goals, but we've made some progress on them. You know, we are creating a hub that's supporting and connecting, and now we're trying to create multiple hubs out there where all of you are connecting. I'm going to talk about our efforts to create a data-informed story when I talk about the 2020 gleaning census here in a moment. And we could do better educating, and that will probably be a focus moving forward. And we're definitely providing lots of opportunities for you guys to network and connect. And we do have a platform with some programmatic resources. We're going to have to think about financial resources. And we're growing. I've actually dropped our budget in the files so you guys can see that. But I wanted to highlight, you know, in 2020, we raised about $60,000 and spent about $35,000. This year, we're raised about $110,000, and we're going to spend about $72,000 of that, maybe a little bit more. And most of that's to programming, as we're finding more ways to reach you guys. And we would love to hear from you. You know, reach out to our board members, reach out to me on what sort of programming you'd like to see us grow as we continue to grow this association and provide more resources to you guys. Before I jump into the census, is there any questions?
Thanks, Sean. So there are a few compliments about the mentorship program that I wanted to draw your attention to. That seemed to be a really popular program. There was one question. Could you go back to the word cloud slide? I think it was difficult for a few people to see. So maybe while you field a couple extra questions, folks can take a look at that. Thank you. And let's see. We've got a question. Oh, can you share, Sean, the links to the stories and articles and maybe that podcast that featured gleaning work?
Yeah, I will list them in a newsletter coming up. I don't have them all easily where I can just drop them into the chat. And they are in past newsletters. This, I guess, is a moment for me to plug the newsletter. If you're not getting the newsletter, it's probably ending up in your spam. Because if you somehow ended up here without getting the newsletter or without me having your email, then I'm impressed. And that's possible. There are a few people who have registered who I'm like, oh, I don't know about that gleaning organization. So if you're not getting the newsletter, then go to the website and add yourself to the list. But first, check your spam because it's probably ending up there.
And there was one more comment that I'm going to turn into a question, which is if folks want to participate in some of those affinity groups you mentioned or future iterations of the mentorship program, where should they go? How should they plug in to those opportunities?
Again, plug in the newsletter. The newsletter is like the source for what's going on in AGO. All the calls for the mentorships go out there. I also send them out in a regular email because I know that they get lost. But all the links to join the affinity groups are in the newsletter as well. So.
Okay, that's all the questions we have for now.
Great. If you guys have any other questions about what we're doing about the association, feel free to ask them. We can come back to them towards the end, or reach out to me so that we can connect. I'm happy to hear feedback from members. This is your association. I work for all of you, and whether that's you need help connecting with someone, I like to be here to help you connect with someone, or if you have a suggestion on something we could be doing or something we could be doing better, we want to hear that. This is, like I said, this is your association. So I'm going to jump in to a brief preview of something we've been working on for quite some time. It feels like forever, but about 18 months. and that's the 2020 Gleaning Census. So many of you probably received a phone call from me sometime last year, maybe lots of phone calls and emails hounding you to find some time in your busy schedule to talk to me. And I promise that the report of that is coming. So we spoke to 129 different gleaning organizations during 2020. And then we compiled data from a few organizations that we weren't able to speak to, that we, found information on their websites or in their annual reports or things like that. These organizations were located in 34 different states. I believe we got to gleaners in every state that we have gleaning organization active. And then 4 different provinces. We did not get all the representation of all the provinces that have gleaning operations in Canada. And then there's at least 43 organizations that we didn't compile any data on. Maybe because we couldn't get a hold of them, or they didn't have time to participate, and there just wasn't good data on their websites. But all of this is being compiled into a comprehensive report that's going to be released in July. And this will be shared not just with you as gleaners. All our members are going to get a PDF copy of it. We're also going to share it with government entities as we try to advocate for more government funding for gleaning. And we're going to share it with funders to educate them about the impact and the power of the gleaning movement. And this is by far the most comprehensive report on gleaning ever done. And this is all, back to those goals. And this is how we're working to educate the public and funded resources about gleaning and its potential impact. So I'd love to give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek of some of the data that we've discovered in this report. This is a little line graph of the organizations. So this is the year they were founded on the bottom, and this is how many organizations were founded in that year. You'll notice that it climbs as we move towards about 10 years old. We don't actually think that there was more organizations formed 10 years ago. What we found is most new organizations are really, really small. And it takes a few years for us to discover them. As I mentioned earlier, there's just people doing gleaning who we just don't know about. And there'll probably continue to be people doing gleaning that we just don't know about. But what we do know is that about between 10 and 15 years, we start to see a pretty sharp decline in the number of gleaning organizations. And this is at the point in which volunteer organizations start to drop off. It's really hard to run something as a volunteer for more than 10 years. And this is also the time in which we see the percentage of founders drop off. Oops, go back. So from the first 5 years of data we have, organizations less than 5 years, about 55% of those have a founder present. The rest were either like founded by a Vista who, was only there for a year, or founded by a staff member within an organization. And then as we move past this about 10 years, that number drops to about 20%. And so founders are leaving. And this tells us that we need to find ways to talk about or to help people transition from being a founder to an organization to having someone else run it. And we need to help all volunteer organizations figure out how to deepen their volunteer bench, because also when that founder leaves, those organizations most of the time fall apart. And so this is something we've learned from this report that we can think about on an association level of how to support you. And if you have ideas around that space, reach out to us. We want to hear those. And again, if you have any questions as I'm going through this report, throw them in the chat and Stephanie can pass them along to me and we can talk about them. This is a graph that sort of helps show some just data on who's out there. So of all gleaning organizations, about 38% of you still have your founder involved. And this doesn't necessarily mean that your founder is still running the organization. They could serve on the board or an advisory committee. And and about 10% are Vista founded. This is, I say about because we started collecting this data a little bit late in the game once we started to realize how many programs were Vista founded. But this is largely due to the work at Harvest Against Hunger and their efforts to place Vistas in other food programs and help them found. So shout out to the Vistas that are out there. They are an integral part of the current gleaning movement. About 7% were founded by someone who had a farming background, as either currently running a farm or was running a farm in the past. And another about 6% of you are housed in university extension. This is a really valuable part of the gleaning movement, and we would love to find ways to build that partnership. So we've been having conversations with those of you who are university extension run. And then we know that there was a ton of food banks doing gleaning at some point, and that number's dropped off, but it's really heartening to me to see that, you know, still 18+% of you are housed within a food bank. That's a great place, we think, for gleaning organizations, as you sort of have access to so many resources there. And there's some really great larger gleaning organizations in the country that are housed in food banks. We're going to actually release some data in the report on all of these different breakdowns and what that means for the operations of those gleaning organizations. Most of you are 501c3s, but there's a significant portion of you who are not. You may be fiscally sponsored, or like we mentioned earlier, part of a university extension. May not have any formal structure. Or there's a couple for-profits or other unique structures out there, B Corp type stuff, and a few of you didn't provide this information. But this is important for those of you who maybe were part of the legal conversation and thinking about how the Good Samaritan Act applies to you, and whether you're covered in that situation if you're donating food and not a 501c3. And it helps us understand how to other support that we may be able to offer. Can we help you, you know, find fiscal sponsorship? Can we help, you know, provide some other support that will help you have the coverage under the Good Samaritan Act, things like that. As all of you who are gleaning every day know, volunteers are incredibly important to the gleaning world. There's, you know, over 51,000 volunteers each year that are out there doing gleaning work. And that's an average of 418 volunteers per gleaning organization out there. You know, and at least 377,000 hours of labor done every year. Many of you don't track this number, and I get it. If you're a small organization, this can be really tricky to track. So we know this number is incredibly higher, but it's at least, you know, 377,000 hours. And we also asked some questions and learned some information about how you're using volunteers. You know, one of the big questions we get from new organizations is, should I allow kids? And so a little bit late also in our data reporting, we started asking this question. So a lot of you didn't report that. Most of these are for people who we didn't talk to from before. But if you look at the people who we asked that, the large majority are allowing kids. And there are some age restrictions on that, and we may at some point delve deeper into this to try to understand what the age restrictions you guys are using are. But most people are allowing kids to glean with them and the families to glean with them. And then we also asked you if you had staff at all your glean, or if you let volunteers lead gleans on your own. And about half of you let volunteers lead gleans, 46% did. Some of you didn't report, and about 35% didn't. We're going to have some interesting data coming out about how this affects the operations of your gleaning organization, at least data I found interesting. But it's good to know sort of where people are at. A lot of this we hope will help to establish some best practices for new organizations and existing organizations. We then begin to look at staff. Staff's a big part of this. Who's going to manage all those volunteers, or make sure the data gets entered and tracks everyone. And we learned that most of us are really small organizations. Although the average staff per organization is 1, there's a few of us who have a lot of staff who pull that number up, but half of us have less than 1 full-time person working, less than half of a full-time person. So this means you have an average of 20 hours a week gleaning. And this could be, and it is for many of you, it means you have a full-time person for 4 or 5 months and maybe a couple hours of a person the rest of the year. And 33 organizations had little to no paid staff. We lumped anyone in this group who had less than 4 hours a week of staff, so about 200 hours a year. 33 organizations fit into that category. And still, these all volunteer organizations glean over 1.2 million pounds of food a year, which is an incredible accomplishment. So pat yourself on the back if you're an all volunteer organization. There's some amazing all volunteer organizations out there who have been around a long time, or who are harvesting so much food every year, just utilizing their community volunteer members. And we think, if we can find ways to help those organizations sustain long term, they'll continue to play such a valuable part in the gleaning movement. Here's a quick breakdown of staffing. As you can see, 0, less than 0.2, less than quarter or half-time person. And those of us with more than 1 staff is really, really small. And as you would guess with budgeting, budgets tend to be pretty small in many of our organizations as well. We took a look at the overall amount of money spent on gleaning. This is, $13 million were spent on gleaning last year, with 23 organizations choosing not to provide their budgets to us. But this is less than, so we tried to then go out and find how much money is being spent on food waste reduction. And Refit has a report in 2016, which was the best that I could find on data, and they estimate that about $134 million was spent on food waste in 2016. I'm sure that number has probably increased over the last 5 years, hopefully increased significantly. But even using that number, less than 10% spent supporting gleaning organizations. This is even though we account for about 21% of all food loss, and that 34% of all surplus food is produce. And Refit estimates that we need to spend about $2 billion in philanthropic funding if we want to meet their goal of reducing food waste by 50% by 2030. And their own estimates is about $152 million of that needs to go towards gleaning. And so as you can see, we are a long way away from that. And I believe one of the things that you probably want from us as an association is to find a way to get us closer to that number. And we intend to use this report to advocate for the value of gleaning and to help push us into the food waste conversation. I think many of you probably feel like me that we've been largely left out of this conversation for far too long. And as we look at some of these reports, like World Wildlife shared yesterday, and I'm sure that Lisa Johnson will share in her session later today. She's talking with EPA. There's a lot of types and crops that a lot of food is being wasted. And so we want to do something about that. Just a brief overview of what your budgets are. The average budget in the gleaning world is $106,000 is being spent on gleaning. But again, there's some large organizations that push that mean up. But 50% of you have budgets under $30,000. 40% of you have budgets under $15,000. And 25 of you have 25%, a quarter of you have budgets that are less than $5,000 a year. This is tremendously small organizations, and if we can push some more, get us much closer to that $152 million worth of funding that ReFed says is needed in gleaning. I'm really excited for the work that gleaners can do. The number of new organizations that can build, the capacity of your guys' organizations that can be built, and the amount of produce that we can rescue could be significant. Here's a little visual of those budgets to give you guys that. And so let's talk about the pounds that we can do. We're gleaning at least 48 million pounds of produce a year, collectively as a movement in North America. And about a little over half of that's done by the good folks at Society of St. Andrews with their programs throughout the country. But the rest of it's being done by all of us small grassroots organizations that are out there. At least 1 million of this is coming from farmers markets. Many of you are just not tracking where that produce is coming from. You know how much food you're rescuing a year, but you don't know whether it's coming from farmers markets or out of your own gardens, where we know at least 2 million pounds is coming from, or was it rescued off of a farm? From the data we have, 3.3 million pounds of that comes off, but we know that is much, much higher. We just don't know how high, because most of you don't have that breakdown. And a few of you didn't provide us with data on pounds gleaned. Either that most of these organizations were really young and maybe didn't track pounds, or really small sort of grassroots type organizations that don't track pounds very well. Our average cost of a pound gleaned is $1.04 per pound. That's gleaned, harvested, processed, or whatever, stored and distributed. And distribution is actually a huge part of the work that we as gleaners are doing. But more than 50% of you have costs that are less than 65 cents per pound, which I think is incredible to harvest and distribute fresh produce on your volunteer-based organizations or with your staffed organization, and using volunteers to do that harvesting. And about 20% of you have even got that cost so much lower at less than 20 cents a pound. It's remarkable work. You guys are doing a remarkable job out there. I knew this, you knew this, and now we hope that funders and the public will know and understand this. So 7,300 locations receive fresh produce from gleaners. And these tend to be organizations that don't typically receive produce. Gleaners, as you guys all know, you're distributing produce to schools and senior centers and assisted living homes and hospitals and libraries. And you're really reaching people who aren't being reached by traditional food rescue or through pantries that are so small they just don't get much fresh produce through the food bank system. 28 different locations per organization. Some of you are doing hundreds of locations, which is just remarkable. And about a third of you are letting your volunteers distribute that produce, a third of you aren't, and a third of you didn't share that data with us, or 25% of you didn't. So we talked a little bit about longevity, and I can't overstate how important longevity is in the food waste space, or in the gleaning space. I'm going to share a few slides that show as our organizations age, we tend to use far more volunteers, from 5 years to this 10 to 15 year where where our data seems to show a little bit of a peak, but we're using far more volunteers as we age. We're gleaning so much more produce. The average amount gleaned by young organization is just a few thousand pounds, and when we get into this 10 to 15 year group, it's the average amount gleaned is 150,000 pounds per organization. So our longevity is so important. That's why one of the things I want to focus on as an association is helping you as gleaners have staying power. Their cost per pound drops significantly this first few years. It's really tough. And what's crazy is these first three columns have a lot more volunteer-led organizations. Volunteer-led organizations are few and far between once you get over about 15 years old. And volunteer-led organizations obviously have much lower cost per pound, or at least in most cases they do. Maybe it's not obvious. The other thing that we found has significant impact on your cost per pound of glean is how many pounds you're gleaning per glean. As you can see, that cost per pound drops dramatically for those people who are getting 5,000 pounds or plus from gleans. Your staff size goes up as you're gleaning more pounds, so that becomes important as larger staff if we want to glean more pounds per glean. But also age has a lot to do with how many pounds we're gleaning per glean. As organizations get older, they find more organizations who have more, or they find more farms that have larger gleans and are able to glean more produce with every glean. Stephanie, do we have any questions? Let's take some questions.
Yes, we have a few really great questions. So let's see. The most popular question right now is, does the report cover diversity information, both in terms of leadership, volunteer base, and who we're all serving? I'd be really curious how equity work is going to fit into all the work of AGO, all the work AGO is doing.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. That's a great question. We did not track demographic information. There was a couple reasons why we didn't when we started this survey. One was most organizations just aren't tracking it. We've had some quite a few conversations about whether they're tracking demographics, and most organizations are not tracking demographics of their volunteers, and so we probably should have asked that question of those who were, and we need to do some work on thinking about what demographics look like within leadership of the gleaning organization. I can tell you anecdotally, it's very white. This is a very white leadership world. I would guess it matches very closely with the slides that were shown during the keynote yesterday, that we probably track very close to that as the nonprofit world. And I would love to have more conversations about what diversity and equity looks like within AGO. We actually tried to do a dismantling white supremacy and otherism workshop that was going to be an add-on to the symposium, but we were unable to secure a presenter. The one we had in mind just didn't have the capacity, and then they're in hot demand right now, and so we were unable to secure that presenter. But I'd like to have more conversations about that. Thanks, Heather.
The next question is from Teresa. She's curious to hear more about the alternate incorporation structures, especially the idea of B Corp that you mentioned.
Yeah, so unfortunately, these are all like one-offs. And we're going to do a couple highlights in the report of some of these one-offs. But so there's, I think, 5 organizations that fit into that other category, 4 or 5, I can't remember off the top of my head, and they're all a different structure. There's not 2 of them that are the same, which is unfortunate, because we can't compare that data. So.
And what about the VISTA program, Sean? Is that something you can elaborate a little bit more on or send resources on, the VISTA program, and how gleaning organizations are utilizing that?
Yeah, we are going to talk a little bit about that in the overall census. But really the main source of Vistas has been Harvest Against Hunger. They're based out of Seattle. They co-hosted the 2019 symposium with us. And they have a program, and I can just briefly speak to it. They have a program that puts Vistas in programs nationally and also within Washington State. So I know that several people at the symposium are hosting Vistas right now, and some people are hosting Vistas outside of the Harvest Against Hunger as well, through your state agencies or all over the place. We probably ought to have a coffee chat call that talks about Vistas, because there are different ways that people are using them. But Harvest Against Hunger is who you would reach out to if you're looking, especially if you're looking for a Vista to start a gleaning program, or try to build your volunteer-based gleaning program to an all-staff one. That's sort of where they specialize in, if I am speaking correctly for them.
We have a question about what is considered gleaning, which I know I've seen several conversations around. Samantha asks, is wholesale produce recovery considered gleaning?
So Samantha, for our cases, what we're trying to track is, did the food come from a plant? Was it picked from a plant by you or by the person who you got it from? And that's sort of where we've defined it. This creep just creeps and creeps, is this gleaning? Is this not gleaning? And it was really hard to sort of draw a line in the sand. We tried to do those two sort of definitions for this report, because so many of us are getting produce from farmers, whether it's why we're at their site gleaning or we're making stops at farms to get produce from gleaning, or farmers markets. All of that sort of fits in there. That's, you're getting it from the person who got it from a plant, or you're getting it from a plant yourself. But that what you defined as gleaning in your organization is really different, and some of the data was a little bit hard to collect that way because what you define may be slightly different than that, and so you don't have that pulled out. But we really tried to exclude stuff that came from grocery stores or wholesalers, and really ask specific questions about that.
Okay, Teresa has another question about whether or not the report will speak to qualitative impacts made by gleaning organizations. So she lists, social behavior change, increased farm visibility and viability, reduction in sunk resources, etc.
Yeah, so some of these we are highlighting. So we have some case studies on organizations that are having some different social impact. Maybe that's, so we case studied Ishkashika and Tucson and their community building efforts. We case studied an organization in Toronto that I'm blanking on the name of right now, or sorry, in Quebec that I'm blanking on the name of, that does more community job training stuff. And so we're highlighting that as we see it. And I meant to mention this when I talked about the slide of cost per pound. For some organizations, rescuing food isn't really the primary driver. They may be more community building focused, or they may be more, educating people about the effects of food waste. And so, well, that was a data point we used, and we tend to use to talk to funders about that gleaning can be on par with other food recovery network or operations, because part of the narrative around gleaning that I've heard as I talk to funders is, we don't fund gleaning, it's too expensive to recover food. And usually my follow-up question for that is, well, how much does it cost? And usually they don't know. And so we would like to be able to show that that many gleaning organizations are rescuing glean produce on par with what other food rescue organizations are rescuing, especially when we start to consider nutritional density of the food that's being rescued. But for a lot of us, that's not why we're doing this work. We're not doing it to rescue thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds of food. And many of the organizations that skew much higher on that cost per pound have very in-depth programming that hits a lot of these other social missions that Teresa mentioned. We won't be highlighting all of them. That will be probably some work for some future reports that hopefully we raise some funding to do that does talk about, but we are in a narrative forum going to be talking about a lot of the other aspects that gleaning does accomplish. So I hope that answered Teresa's question.
There's one last question in our question tab here, and it is there a directory of member organizations of AGO, and where do we find it?
So there isn't a directory of member organizations. This report will include a directory of all the organizations that we gathered data on. So there'll be 150 organizations in there. I also have a directory of gleaning organizations that I'm always happy to share with people. If you want to connect to an organization, reach out to me. We probably will eventually put together a member directory. We actually, it's been on the back burner since before the symposium. Now that the symposium's behind us, that will be one thing that all members will be receiving, like a little welcome packet that includes a directory of who is currently a member in an online forum so that it stays up to date. So you can look for that in July as well. There'll be a lot of information coming in July. But.
And Sean, one last comment. Heather, in a follow-up to her question, said, you know, for what it's worth on her end, they'd be willing to incorporate any data that AGO wanted to collect into their data collection. So I wonder if you wanted to wrap up with, you know, are there things that organizations can be planning for to make the next census or the next data collection more effective and representative?
Yeah, you know, I would actually like this to be a conversation that we start to have as an association, is what data do we want to track? We had a quasi conversation around this fall when we started to talk about, you know, are pounds really the best way to track what we're doing? But hopefully after this report comes out, we can have a conversation where people can say, this is what we'd like to see. We do intend to do this report again. Someone mentioned that it was going to be an annual thing, which it will not be. I mean, you can see it took me over a year to do, so, but we will most likely do it again. We intend to do it again, so we should begin to have a conversation on what that looks like and how we can collectively collect that data. We are collecting very different data right now. That's one of probably the key takeaways from this is, you know, some of us are counting individual volunteers, some of us are just counting bodies that show up to events, some of us are tracking volunteer hours, some of us aren't. There's a whole host of disparities in that. I would like to wrap up with reminding you that this is your association. So please get involved. We currently only have 3 board members. We're looking to expand that board. There's going to be a call for board members coming out in the next week or so. So join our board, reach out if you're interested in shaping this association. Share about your organization. If we didn't talk, it's too late for your information to be included in this data, but it's not too late for you to be included in the list of organizations that go in the report. It's not too late to share about your organization so I know who you are and can connect you to other people. Attend the events, the coffee chats, the affinity groups, the symposium, all just works because you guys come and share your expertise. You know, you can share your expertise formally as a mentor, you can share it as a technical advisor, you can share it one-on-one by connecting when I send you a random email that says, hey, so-and-so is curious about this, and I think you know a lot about this, so please connect. And then help shape the association. This is what we look like is up to you. I work for you. I want to hear your ideas of what we should be offering. You know, we're going to send out a survey about this symposium. We're probably going to send out a survey here shortly that talks about other programming that you'd like to see as we begin to explore what 2022 looks like for us, and share that information, or just shoot me an email that says, hey Sean, have you thought about doing this? This could be really great. We have several ideas that are on back burners as we're working towards capacity for those that you may begin to see. We haven't forgotten about them. But you can always nudge me and say, hey, we talked about doing a Slack group like 6 months ago. Where is it? And we would love to continue to have that. Any more questions? We have a few more minutes for this session. It's supposed to end in about 10 minutes. So if there's any more questions, I'm happy to field them. If not, I'm happy to connect with people throughout the rest of the day. Send me an invite to join you in a chat room, and I would love to chat with you and visit with you.
Looks like there was one more question that came in, Sean. Can we nominate folks for the board? Do you want to go into that process a little bit deeper?
You're welcome to nominate people to us. We eventually hope that the board, what the board selection and nomination looks like is it happens at our symposium where people are voted on and selected there. We are probably a little bit away from that, but not that far. Not meeting in person has made that a little bit trickier. But if you nominate someone, you should tell them they're being nominated, or just reach out to them and say, apply, because nominating someone who doesn't have any interest just means that I have to call them and them tell me no. So they're probably less likely to tell you no if you know them well. So. Well, great. Thank you guys so much. And thank you for everyone who's participated over the last, 5 years that we've been doing this. It's not possible without the support of you. And there's been so many people who have shared so much insight and put so much time and effort into this. Thank you to the founding board members who spent the last year tirelessly working for you. If you get a chance to talk to them in a chat, thank them. They have represented you guys so well, and had so many thoughtful conversations on what do Gleaners really need. And they truly have put this movement above their own organizations, and have done a really good job putting this movement above AGO as an organization in general. And so we deeply appreciate the trust that you guys have put in us, and hopefully you'll continue to be involved with us and work with us to build a movement. And I really feel like Gleaning's time is now. We have never been more popular than we are at this moment, as eyes have been awakened to the problem that we've known about for decades. And so I'm excited to see where this organization and this movement goes over the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm excited to be able to sort of steer the ship for you guys. Yeah, thanks.